Okay, well, thank you very much, Irene. Again, my name is Richard Hill, and I had a little bit of notoriety in that I was the first known case of an adoptee using genetic genealogy to find birth family. And I talked about that in one of my presentations that I did, and I did for you some time ago. And also, it's my book, which I will mention at the end of the presentation. I live in Michigan, not too far from Grand Rapids. It is cold and snowy here, just like it's probably cold and snowy there. But we're getting by. So why don't we go ahead and get started then? I'm going to share my slides. And as I said, we will go through the presentation. And then at the end, I will turn off the slides, come back to me, and we will take any questions then. All right. All right. Well, I want to welcome you to my presentation of mastering the myHeritage DNA test. Well, as you may know, myHeritage is a comprehensive genealogical record site. It's much like Ancestry.com in that sense. It also has some great tools for enhancing and playing around with photos. You may have seen a live memory thing that they just came out with recently, which is kind of fun. But today we're just going to ignore all of that, and we're going to focus on the myHeritage DNA test. Now, all right, so here's what we're going to cover. The myHeritage test is an autosomal DNA test, so I'm going to review the basics of such tests. Then I will explain why myHeritage should be included in your DNA testing program. And then finally, I will demonstrate the key features and tools of this particular DNA test. Right? There are three major DNA test types. Y chromosome testing traces a man's direct paternal line through his father's father's father and so on. Mitochondrial DNA testing traces anyone's direct maternal line through your mother's mother's mother and so on. Well, these first two tests are offered by Family Tree DNA. Autosomal DNA testing is the third and really the most popular type, and it's offered by several companies. Well, unlike the first two test types, which only look at specific lines in our family trees, autosomal DNA testing can uncover relatives from any branch of our family trees. But this type of test can only go back consistently about 5 to 7 generations, with some reach out to around 10 generations. And that's because autosomal DNA is a mix inherited from both parents. The amount of DNA from our ancestors gets cut in half after every generation. And as a result of this, the DNA from many of our more distant ancestors simply will not be detectable. When we order a test, our DNA is compared with everyone who has done the same test or will take that test in the future. And we are looking for genetic matches who share common ancestors with us, and they may have additional information about them. Well, this can confirm or expand our family trees. Well, the amount of shared DNA is measured either as a percentage or in a unit called centimorgans. And generally, the more DNA you share with the match, the more closely related you are. On the other hand, the weakest matches may not be related to us at all. They just happen to have ancestors from similar regions. Well, due to the randomness in the way DNA is inherited, some of our cousins may have inherited different segments and will not show up as a match. Well, any relative out to the second cousin level will always show up as a match. You have so much DNA in common that it will not be missed. But as the common ancestors get farther back, a declining percentage of cousins will share measurable amounts of DNA with us. And for example, at the fourth cousin level, only 50% will actually show up as matches. Well, here's a projection of how many cousins we might have at various levels. If only 50% of our fourth cousins will match, that's less than 500 matches. And that's assuming that every one of them had tested, which is a highly unlikely happening. So how could I have 16,000 matches on myHeritage and even more on Ancestry? Well, that happens because I have millions of very distant cousins. So even though a tiny percentage of them have enough DNA in common with me to show up as a match, that's still a lot of matches, and it's the same for you. This type of autosomal DNA test for genealogy was introduced by 23andMe in 2009. And over the next few years, several other companies began to offer it as well. Here are the 5 autosomal DNA tests that provide matching and the year that each was introduced. Well, no matter which test or company you choose, the process for testing your DNA is basically the same. You order online from the testing company website using a credit or debit card. They mail you a test kit. You return your DNA sample by mail. When your results are ready, which usually takes a few weeks, they will email you. And from there, you can log into your own private account with a password. And it's important to note that no reports are actually sent by postal mail. And that's because your results are not static. More people are going to test after you, and you will keep getting new genetic matches. And furthermore, all the best tools for working with your matches are online. I think genetic genealogy is really not something where you just print out a report and file it away. It's really kind of an ongoing adventure, and there is just much you can do with your results. Well, there are 4 major reasons why you should include myHeritage in your DNA testing plan. They are large database, re-uploads, cheek swabs, and global reach. Well, now let's cover those in order. The autosomal DNA databases have grown steadily and dramatically in size. The total number of people tested is now estimated to be nearly 40 million, with 25 million of them taking the Ancestry DNA test. And as you can see from this graph, the 3 biggest databases are Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, and myHeritage. And if you pick just one test and most of your relatives happen to choose other tests, you won't see them as matches. So I suggest you get into all the databases that provide matching. Well, fortunately, myHeritage allows you to upload your DNA from another test for free. You need to log into that other test and find the option to download your raw data to a computer. It varies from one test to another where that is. Well, the file is a compressed file of numbers that are just gibberish to us, so we don't want to open it when we download it. It wouldn't make any sense. So what you do need to know is where you saved it, because then you go to this page on myHeritage, and then you just click Start and follow directions, and that will help you upload your DNA to their database. And then you will get a list of genetic matches, just as if you had tested directly and had sent in your own sample. Now, there will be minor differences because each test looks at somewhat different parts of your DNA, but you won't miss any of your closer matches. And to use most of the tools that I'm covering today, you will need to pay a one-time unlock fee of $29. Now, here's a list of the features that require that fee, and I'm going to be demonstrating all of them. By not waiting for a test kit and mailing it back, you will see your results much faster through an upload. And plus, the free upload feature has additional value. First of all, genetic genealogists often test multiple family members, and some of these people are no longer available to submit a new sample, yet they may have tested elsewhere. Secondly, free uploads let you get every kit you manage into this single database and then access them all conveniently. There's no need to log out and log back in for every different person. And finally, just having more family members in the database can yield more useful information. In my case, I have DNA from these family members in myHeritage. As an adoptee, I have no full siblings. However, I have discovered 3 half-siblings, and their data is quite helpful in sorting DNA matches. I also researched my wife's family tree, and my account includes some of her family members. Well, Ancestry and 23andMe both collect samples using spit kits where you spit saliva into a tube. Well, myHeritage and Family Tree DNA use cheek swabs where you swab the inside of your cheeks with little swabs. Well, the method usually doesn't matter unless the subject cannot easily spit saliva into a tube. And for that reason, swab kits are more inclusive. And here are 4 examples where the swabs just often work better. The very young, the very old, anyone with xerostomia, which is dry mouth, and believe it or not, the recently deceased. And that's because many funeral directors will collect a sample for you if you have a swab test kit on hand. A final reason for including myHeritage is the company's global reach. Based in Israel, their website supports 42 languages and translates names into different languages. It is the most popular DNA test in many countries outside the US, and it does report the country in which our DNA matches reside. So overall, myHeritage provides the best chance of discovering living cousins in our ancestral homelands. Well, if you want to master the myHeritage DNA test, you need to understand and use these features. And I will be demonstrating each of them using screenshots from my own account. And I will try to give you a little time with some more complex slides, but since this session is being recorded and it will be available for members to rewatch for 3 months, you will have the opportunity to pause as needed to absorb all the details. Well, let's start with family trees. Genetic genealogy is most powerful when we combine DNA test results with conventional family trees. Well, only some of the DNA tests support the uploading of family trees, but myHeritage is one of them that does. myHeritage has some excellent family tree features. You can upload and manage multiple trees. They can have up to 250 persons without a subscription. If you do have some type of subscription with them, you can have unlimited tree size. They have some tree tools they call Timeline, Consistency Checker, and Pedigree Map. And also, you can view your trees in Family View, Pedigree View, or Fan View, and you can do each of those with or without color coding. Now, the family tree functionality at myHeritage is so good that Family Tree DNA is discontinuing its own family tree feature, and now lets their users build their trees at myHeritage. So if you do have an account at Family Tree DNA, note there is information in their Help Center, and that includes a link to the myHeritage Help Center. Well, this is the pedigree view of my family tree, just showing the first few generations with color coding. Now, as a genetic genealogist, I like pedigree views because the top line traces the inheritance path of the Y chromosome, and the bottom path traces mitochondrial DNA. In the fan view, the default emphasizes data over color, and you can choose the number of generations to display. Well, the fan view with color coding emphasizes color over data. And in this example, it only shows the surnames of my 8 great-grandparents. Yet it clearly draws attention to the holes where ancestors are still unknown. DNA match review. As with other DNA tests, myHeritage provides you with a list of your genetic matches, and you can sort them in various ways. The default is to list them by the amount of shared DNA, but you can also sort them by the number of shared segments, the largest segment, by full name, or by the most recent matches. So I said before, I have 16,000 matches on myHeritage, and I have stored them here to put the most, I've sorted them here to put the most recent matches at the top of the list. And so here are the first 3. Well, note that 2 of them reside outside the US in the United Kingdom and Sweden. And also note that the weakest matches show a low confidence indicator, since they may not be related to me at all. Well, now let's examine the information provided for each match in more detail. And I'm going to use another example from my match list. The first thing you see is a summary like this. Now, this particular match is to a man named Michael. And while the report does show his last name, I have covered it for privacy wherever it appears. Well, there is a lot of information in this summary, so just let's review from left to right. Clicking the white square will let you mark this DNA match as a favorite or apply one of your own custom label colors. The yellow star indicates it has been marked as a favorite. And in myself, I use red to indicate matches in my maternal line. But you can create far more complex labeling systems if you want. Now, the bottom icon is where you can add notes. And since I have added a note to this one, the note icon also shows color. Now, if the match had added a photo to their account, you would see that image. But otherwise, you see a female symbol in a red circle or a male symbol in a blue circle. Well, next you see the name of the match and an age category. If your match manages his own account, you will see the country where he resides, as I showed you in a prior screen. Well, in this particular case, Michael's DNA is managed by Sandy, who does have the same last name and just might be the family genealogist. Well, that means Michael's location is uncertain, but in either case, there is a contact link that allows you to compose and send a message to whoever is managing the account. Well, next you see an estimated relationship, in this case, a third cousin. To the right of that match, you will find some details of the DNA match. The total amount of shared DNA as a percentage and in centimorgans, the number of shared segments, and the length of the longest segment. Well, clicking the question mark takes you to a page that explains all of these measurements in easy to understand terms. Finally, at the bottom of the summary, you will see if this person appears in a family tree on the myHeritage site and how many people it contains. In Michael's case, it's a tree with 1,153 people. Well, when there is a tree, you may see a summary of clues as shown here. And you may see things like various tree comparisons that we're going to cover in a little more detail later. So I'm not going to get into those here. Looking further right, there are two buttons. The View Tree button is obvious. It lets you view that person's family tree. Now, how much you can see will depend on that person's privacy settings, as it would with your privacy settings if they were looking at your tree. Now, clicking the Review DNA Match button lets you scroll through lots and lots of additional information about this match. And this includes some things that might be found in a comparison of your family trees, such as shared ancestral surnames, shared ancestral places, and smart matches, which is what they define as the same person in both trees. Well, some elements of the DNA match review are on my list as separate features, and theory of family relativity is one, so I'm going to cover that now. This uses family trees and genealogical records to show one or more possible paths to common ancestors. Well, here's the theory I see for connecting me to Michael. Michael and I appear to be third cousins on my mother's side. Well, this summary diagram shows our separate ancestral lines to common ancestors, in this case, a pair of great-great-grandparents. Well, to see more detail, you can click the View Full Theory button up at the right. In the full theory, we see that this theory is based on two separate trees. Now, in some cases, more than two trees will be used just to piece together a theory. The green dot shows where the two trees overlap, and it gives it a confidence level, in this case, 87%, that it's really the same person in both trees. Now, here, I think the uncertainty is probably due to one tree using Lucy's married name and the other her maiden name. But the birth and death years do match. If a connecting dot is brown instead of green, it means the connection was based on sources other than trees posted here. It's important to note that a theory is just that. It is not proof of how we are related. As you surely know, posted trees are not always accurate. Furthermore, the total amount of DNA we share could have accumulated from multiple more distant ancestors. Yet, these theories are important clues that I have found to be correct much of the time. I currently have 43 theories, and more are being added periodically. Since Michael's account is managed by Sandy, we don't know where Michael resides. But this full theory page does reveal that Sandy is in the US, so that might mean that Michael is also in the US. Well, here's another theory that connects me on my father's side to a fourth cousin once removed named Goldie. In this case, there are 5 different paths that connect us through different individuals, most of them involving 3 different trees. And I can view any of the paths, and this is just one of them. All of them point to the same couple as our most recent common ancestors. Moving on, CM Explainer. Another feature included in the DNA match review is CM Explainer, where CM stands for centimorgans. This tool uses the amount of shared DNA and your ages, if known, to fine-tune relationship predictions and show a probability for each possible relationship. Well, here's what it shows for Michael and me. Our most likely relationship, based on the amount of DNA we share, is third cousin, with a probability of 46%. And our most recent common ancestors would be great-great-grandparents. Well, you may remember the theory of family relativity also predicted us to be third cousins just based on a paper trail comparison. The fact that these totally different and unconnected tools reach the same answer is a pretty good sign. Well, knowing the relative ages, myHeritage can name relationships more precisely in easier to understand language. For example, a third cousin's son instead of just third cousin once removed. Note that none of these relationships are 100% certain, and your true relationship will not always be the one with the highest probability. At the bottom of the list, it says show more relationships plus diagram. Well, if you click on that, the first thing you see is a longer list that includes more of the less likely relationships. And that often includes some half relationships. And in those cases, the most recent common ancestor is singular. For example, a great-grandparent rather than a pair of great-grandparents. Scroll down and you will see a diagram showing the possible relationships. Now, the diagram is the same every time. What's different is which relationships appear in color and the probabilities next to each. To keep this simple, I selected full relationships only, but you can instead choose to view just the half relationships or all relationships. I also checked the box to show probabilities for MRCA, most recent common ancestors. In this case, there is a 63% probability that the most recent common ancestors are great-great-grandparents. And that is, of course, consistent with the most likely relationship of third cousin. Well, it's important to remember that these percentages are probabilities and not certainties. In this other example from my DNA matches, it shows a 75% chance that Tiffany is my first cousin's daughter. Yet I know for a fact that she is my first cousin's granddaughter. Now, the probability for that is only 8.6%, but that is the correct relationship. Well, here's why this can happen. Due to the randomness of DNA inheritance, there is a lot of variation in the amount of DNA found for a given relationship. Well, here are two relationships from an independent shared centimorgan project table that summarizes the results from tens of thousands of DNA testers. For first cousin once removed, which would include a first cousin's daughter, the average amount of DNA shared is 433 centimorgans, but the range extends from 102 to 980. Well, below that is the data for first cousin twice removed, which would include a cousin's granddaughter. The 398 centimorgans that Tiffany and I share is indeed closer to the average of 433 for a first cousin once removed. But 398 is still within the broad range of 33 to 471 reported for first cousins twice removed. The centimorgan explainer is also available under DNA tools for checking matches from other DNA testing services. Simply enter the amount of shared DNA and the range ages of both people. Well, earlier this year, I entered the data from myself and a paternal half-sibling. After clicking submit, I see the possible relationships. The probability that we are half siblings with one parent in common is 91%. Some other relationships are possible, but in this case, much less likely. Shared DNA matches and chromosome browser. Well, something else you will often see in the DNA match review is a list of shared DNA matches. It's a list of other tested people you and this match have in common. Well, combined with a chromosome browser, this is another powerful tool. Michael and I have 61 shared DNA matches, and here are 3 of them. Judy is a known first cousin to me and projects to be a 4th cousin to Michael. She is on my maternal side, so I know that Michael is also a maternal side relative. Teresa projects to be a 3rd cousin to each of us, and Keith is closer to Michael than he is to me. Well, anything that I can discover about the family trees of these shared matches is another way to identify the common ancestors responsible for my genetic match to Michael. Two of these 3 shared matches have a symbol on the right that indicates that we have some triangulated segments. Clicking that symbol for Judy opens a chromosome browser that compares me to Judy and Michael on 22 pairs of chromosomes. Well, to help this fit on the screen, I've only captured the first 5 chromosomes. The orange bars mark the segments that I have in common with my first cousin, Judy. And as you can see, there's quite a few of them. The maroon bars are segments I share with my unknown relative, Michael. The line around the overlapping section at the right end of chromosome 5 indicates a triangulated segment that all 3 of us have in common. So this segment likely passed down from our common ancestor. Well, validating triangulation is complex, and especially when comparing the DNA of a large number of people. And myHeritage does it automatically. A separate chromosome browser under DNA tools lets you view shared DNA segments between you and multiple DNA matches, and which can help you point to a common ancestor. myHeritage lets you select up to 7 DNA matches to view shared DNA segments. You can also download the detailed segment data, including the start and end locations and the number of SNPs, to a spreadsheet. For this example, I have chosen my 3 paternal half-siblings. Note that 2 of them have already been identified as a half-sister and a half-brother by CM Explainer. But the 3rd one is uncertain. Well, that's because the 3rd half-sibling is 14 years younger than me, and therefore she cannot be eliminated as a niece based on our relative ages alone. Once again, I'm only showing the first 5 chromosomes. And as you would expect with relatives this close, we have a lot of shared segments. I share 35 with the first half-sibling, 31 with the second, and 29 with the third. And 12 of those are triangulated segments shared by all 4 of us. DNA match filters. Well, myHeritage has a huge database of testers, and it's easy to be overwhelmed by the volume of DNA matches. As I said, I have over 16,000 matches, and my wife has over 9,000. Well, fortunately, there are many DNA match filters that let you focus on smaller groups of matches that fit just whatever you're trying to accomplish at any given time. Initially, the filters are not shown above your list of matches. You simply click on filters to make these filter groups appear. They are tree details, relationships, locations, and labels. When I captured this series of screenshots, there were 2 more filters for ethnicities and genetic groups, but I noticed that they are no longer offered. And that's a good reminder that testing companies will periodically make changes, and your account may look and work differently over time. Well, click on any of the filter groups above your list of matches and a drop-down menu appears. My favorite tree details filter focuses on those matches that have a theory of family relativity. As I said, I have 43 such matches, and they are the ones I like to check out first. Other useful filters focus on those with a smart match, which means you have a common person in both trees, or those that have an ancestral surname or a place in common. The has family tree filter is not as useful as you might think, and that's because many of your matches will have a family tree of 1 themselves. In the relationships filter, I can select close family, which for me shows 8 relatives out to the first cousin level. Extended family reaches out a little farther, and in my case, 6 more matches. And distant relatives shows everyone else. In the locations filter, you can filter by the country where your DNA match is located. For example, I have nearly 1,300 matches in the United Kingdom, but only 223 in Germany. While skipping ethnicities and genetic groups that are no longer offered as filters, myHeritage lets you create and apply custom labels to your matches. And you can also mark any match as a favorite. Well, so this last filter lets you select only the matches with a specific label or only the matches you marked as favorites. Well, quite wonderfully, myHeritage lets you combine multiple filters. For example, I like to check for matches with a theory of relativity who live in the United Kingdom, where I have known ancestry. I have 2 such matches. The theory connecting me to Jennifer shows multiple paths through 4 or 5 family trees. If it's right, we are 5th cousins on my father's side. Auto clusters. This is an automatic tool that organizes your DNA matches into clusters that likely descended from common ancestors. Once you initiate this, you receive a zip file by email that includes 3 files: an HTML file with a visual representation of the auto cluster analysis, a CSV file with a spreadsheet version, and a README PDF file with instructions. Well, here is the upper left corner of my visual representation. A list of my matches appears vertically down the left and horizontally across the top in the same order. And again, I've covered last names for privacy on both lists. Well, each colored cell represents an intersection between 2 of my matches, meaning that both individuals match me and each other. And then each color represents a shared match cluster. And since members of a cluster match me and most or all of the other cluster members, they may all descend from the same branch of my family tree. And here are the first few rows of my spreadsheet. Well, after an identifier number, it provides each person's name, a link to their family tree, if they have one on myHeritage, and a count of the number of people in that tree. And obviously, exploring those trees is another way to find the common ancestor that we share. Ethnicity estimates and genetic groups. Well, throughout the world, there are regional variations in the genetic characteristics of native populations. Well, myHeritage has established a genetic model for each region. The ethnicity estimate compares your DNA with each of these models to discover how much of your DNA comes from each region. Ethnicity estimates can be fascinating, and their accuracy is improving over time. But the important word to emphasize here is estimates. These should not be considered scientific facts. They can help confirm known ethnic origins, and the shared ethnicity results can sometimes provide additional clues about how you may be related to a given DNA match. myHeritage has an ethnicities around the world report based on massive user data. It shows the most common ethnicities in different countries and the top countries for each ethnicity. Well, my wife's ethnicity is a better example than mine. Both of her paternal grandparents were born in Croatia. So choosing that country yields this summary from the Ethnicities Around the World report. The two most common ethnicities in Croatia are Balkan and East European. Well, at the right is my wife's ethnicity estimate on myHeritage. Adding her 31% Balkan and 13% East European gets her close to the expected 50% ancestry from that region based on her father's side. The missing 5% is probably buried in her 10.5% North and West European. Ethnicities Around the World is open and free for visitors, not just DNA testers. Anyone can access this feature in the DNA Tools section under Ethnicities Map. In addition to seeing the data by country, as I did for Croatia, you can select an ethnicity to see which countries have the highest percentage of that ethnicity. Well, here's the report for Balkan ethnicity. And there are 5 countries all clustered together on the Balkan Peninsula, where more than 90% of the population has some Balkan ethnicity. Let's back up here. There we go. I always tell people to never draw conclusions about relatedness from the ethnicity estimate in a DNA test. Well, here's an example comparing 2 of my children on myHeritage. And while they are clearly full siblings based on shared DNA, they don't even look related in an ethnicity comparison. Well, remember, siblings only share about half of their DNA, and they may have inherited quite different proportions from their 4 grandparents. Well, in a massive effort to provide finer geographic backgrounds for us, myHeritage research has also identified 2,100 of what they call genetic groups. Members of a group share geographic origins in their family trees, but they may have multiple ethnicities. Well, for Americans, these can sometimes pinpoint more recent migrations within the US. Well, in addition to her paternal ancestry from Croatia, My wife's genetic groups includes Pennsylvania and Ohio, which does indeed match the migration path of her maternal ancestors. Well, DNA testing is especially important to me. When I sent in my sample in late 2006, I had no idea that I would be a pioneer. And I did become the first known case of an adoptee identifying birth family through a genetic genealogy DNA test. And you can read the whole story of my decades-long search in my book, Finding Family, My Search for Roots and the Secrets in My DNA. It's available in print, Kindle, and audiobook formats at Amazon.com and other booksellers. And I've quoted one professional book review here, plus a summary of more than 800 reader reviews on Amazon. Well, to learn more about DNA testing, I suggest you visit my website, dnafavorites.com. You can see the menu of pages here in red, and starting near the top and moving down from one page to the next just provides a great overview of genetic genealogy today. But along the way, you'll find more than 150 links that can take you directly to the most useful DNA testing resources. Again, that is dnafavorites.com. Well, this concludes my presentations today on mastering the myHeritage DNA test. I currently have 4 other presentations on DNA topics, each one entirely different. And you have the relatively rare opportunity that this library has now presented all 5 of my presentations over the last 2 or 3 years and been recorded and been available for times. If you, but different people have not seen them yet, if you would like me to return for another session, I'm always happy to do that. Now, in addition to my DNA Favorites website, I have a DNA Favorites Facebook page, and you can also look for the name Richard Hill DNA on Blue Sky, X, which is formerly Twitter, and LinkedIn. By the way, there's a lot of movement among genealogy people from X to Blue Sky. I'm on there myself now, and I'm finding lots and lots of genealogy activity there. If you belong to a genealogy group or any other group that would enjoy learning more about DNA testing through a virtual or online or in-person presentation, if it happens to be somewhere near Michigan, just contact me through email. That email is richardhilldna@gmail.com. Well, this does conclude my presentation, so I'm now going to stop sharing my slides and just try to answer any questions you have about this particular presentation or about genetic genealogy in general.
Okay, that's the time for you to unmute yourself and ask the question if you have any. Mary, I see you unmuted yourself and you have a question, yeah?
Yes, I do.
Mhm.
Hello, Richard. Thank you very much for giving the presentation, and Irene for facilitating it, making it available to us. Once we do this, I guess I have one question to begin with, where we talk about looking at relationships out to second cousins. What about, we often hear the term, which is always a little confusing, first cousins once removed, second cousins once removed. How does that fit in?
Well, that's one of the things that myHeritage does a little bit better now if they know the ages, because they do describe it as a first cousin's son or a first cousin's daughter
Right.
instead of first cousin once removed, and or a first cousin's granddaughter if it's instead of first cousin twice removed. So that, you know, that does just make it a little smoother. A lot of people seem to have trouble with that, and I have seen just some excellent tables that simply help clarify that relationship.
And are those on your website?
Not directly on my website. I believe one of the links on my website is to the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. I'm pretty sure there's one on that. There's probably one on Family Search, I would bet. So
Okay.
yeah, they're around the tables that show that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? No, Mary?
I have a second, but I'd like anyone else to go first.
No, I think Peggy is waiting for you to ask the question. I don't see her unmuting.
Oh, okay. So then and I have some relatives that have done a lot of family tree things, and I've never firsthand done any of this yet. But does this then let us find out these people's names and addresses? Like, what do we do after we go through this exercise?
Well, what you typically do is if you find these matches that appear that the evidence suggests that they are related to a particular line in your family tree, and that's a line of your family tree you're interested in exploring. I mean, you can, of course, say explore their trees online. That may help you figure it out. But you can also reach out and contact people. There's this myHeritage and every other major company does provide some means for reaching out and trying to contact people. And I always recommend if you do that, since many people test in more than one company, always mention which test
Right.
on which test you found the match and how close your match was, and maybe a little bit about what you do know, and just try to let them know that you'd be interested in collaborating on that particular on your common ancestors. That's kind of how the whole thing works, is you get you identify cousins that you didn't know anything about that
Right.
they know something about a particular branch of your tree that you don't know anything about, and vice versa. So it's been a great collaborative tool for thousands of genealogists.
It's a lot of information, and you can
Yes.
dig and dig. It's only the beginning. And thank you very much again to everybody who came.